In the summer of 2008, a small child vanished from her home in Orlando, Florida. Her name was Caylee Anthony. She was only 2 years old. For 31 days, no one outside her family reported her missing. By the time the truth began to surface, the case would grow into one of the most shocking, most emotional, and most controversial criminal investigations in American history. Millions of people watched this case unfold on television. News stations followed every detail. Courtrooms were packed. The public demanded answers. But even after the trial ended, one question never went away. What really happened to Caylee Anthony? Tonight on the Darken Realm, we take a deep, detailed look at the life, disappearance, investigation, and trial surrounding Caylee Anthony, a case that still divides opinions to this day. This is not a story filled with easy answers. It is a story of family, lies, confusion, and a justice system tested in front of the entire world. Orlando, Florida is best known for theme parks, sunshine, and family vacations. But in 2008, this city became the center of a national nightmare. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, 3 generations of the Anthony family lived together in one home. A young mother, her parents, and a little girl who everyone described as happy and full of life. From the outside, the home looked ordinary. Nothing suggested that it would soon be connected to one of the most infamous true crime cases in modern history. But behind closed doors, tensions were already building. Caylee Anthony was born on August 9, 2005. She was described by her grandparents as playful, loving, energetic, always smiling. Caylee lived with her mother, Caylee Anthony, and her grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony, in Orlando. To her grandparents, Caylee was the center of their world. Cindy Anthony often took care of Caylee while Caylee went out with friends or claimed to be working. George Anthony also helped care for Caylee and was deeply attached to his granddaughter. Family photos from that time show Caylee laughing, playing, and enjoying time with her family. No one could imagine that her life would end so soon. Caylee's mother, Caylee Anthony, was born in 1986. At the time Caylee disappeared, Caylee was 22 years old. She lived with her parents and daughter, but often acted as if she lived an independent life. She told friends and family that she had a job, went out frequently, and spent little time at home. But there were problems. Caylee had a complicated relationship with her parents. Arguments were common, especially between Caylee and her mother, Cindy. Cindy often questioned Caylee about her job, her responsibilities, her honesty. Despite these issues, Caylee's parents believed Caylee was safe and loved. That belief would soon be shattered. The Anthony household was not peaceful. George Anthony, a former law enforcement officer, struggled with stress and financial problems. Cindy Anthony worked long hours and tried to hold the family together. Caylee, on the other hand, often avoided responsibility. She told lies about where she worked, who she spent time with, what she was doing during the day. These lies were not yet seen as dangerous, just immature. But when Caylee disappeared, those lies would take on a much darker meaning. In June of 2008, Caylee Anthony was still alive. She was still laughing, still playing, still trusting the people around her. But within days, everything would change. In the next chapter, we will examine the final days Caylee was seen alive, and the moment when her disappearance should have raised immediate alarms, but didn't. Because for 31 days, no one called the police. The last confirmed day Caylee Anthony was seen alive was June 16, 2008. That morning began like many others in the Anthony household. Cindy Anthony left for work. George Anthony also left the house. Caylee Anthony stayed behind with Caylee. According to later testimony, Caylee spent the morning at home with her mother. No one outside the family saw Caylee that day. By the afternoon, Caylee told her parents she was leaving the house with Caylee. She claimed she was taking her daughter to a nanny. That nanny's name, Caylee said, was Zenaida Gonzalez, often shortened to Zanny. This would become one of the most important details in the entire case. Caylee Anthony told her family that Caylee was being watched by a trusted nanny named Zanny. She said Zanny had cared for Caylee many times before, but there was a problem. No one had ever met Zanny. Cindy Anthony asked questions. Where did Zanny live? How long had Caylee known her? Why had they never met her? Caylee always had an answer. She said Zanny lived nearby. She said Zanny moved often. She said Zanny worked odd hours. Her answers sounded believable at first, but none of them were true. Investigators later discovered that Zenaida Gonzalez did exist, but she had no connection to Caylee or Caylee Anthony. The nanny Caylee described did not exist. Here is one of the most disturbing facts of this case. For 31 days, Caylee Anthony was missing, and no one reported her missing. During that time, Caylee did not call police. Caylee did not report a kidnapping. Caylee did not ask for help. Instead, Caylee continued living her life. She went out with friends. She attended parties. She was seen smiling and carefree. To outsiders, it looked like nothing was wrong. To her parents, Caylee kept repeating the same lie. Caylee was with the nanny. But as days passed, Cindy Anthony grew more worried. She asked to see Caylee. She asked to talk to Caylee on the phone. She asked when Caylee was coming home. Caylee always had an excuse. Caylee's behavior during this time raised serious red flags later on. She did not appear anxious. She did not appear afraid. She did not appear desperate to find her child. Instead, she avoided questions. She changed stories. She distracted herself with friends. Some friends later told police that Caylee never mentioned Caylee being missing. Others said she spoke as if Caylee was simply away on a trip. This behavior would later be used by prosecutors to argue that Caylee already knew Caylee was gone. One of the most critical moments in the case involved Caylee's car. In late June 2008, Caylee's car was found abandoned. When Cindy Anthony opened the trunk, she noticed a strong, horrible smell. She later described it as smelling like death. The smell was so disturbing that Cindy believed something terrible had happened. This discovery pushed Cindy to finally act. On July 15, 2008, nearly a month after Caylee was last seen, Cindy Anthony called 911. In the 911 call, Cindy Anthony said words that shocked the nation. She told the operator, her granddaughter had been missing for 31 days. Her daughter had stolen her car. There was a terrible smell coming from the vehicle. This was the first time law enforcement became aware that Caylee Anthony was missing. From that moment on, the case exploded into a full criminal investigation. By the time police were notified, Caylee had already been gone for over a month. No missing person alert had been issued, no search had been started, no help had been requested, and the person responsible for protecting Caylee had waited 31 days to speak up. In the next chapter, we will follow the police investigation, the shocking lies Caylee told detectives, and the moment when the public began to realize this case was far darker than anyone imagined. On July 15, 2008, Orlando police officially became involved in the disappearance of Caylee Anthony. By this time, Caylee had already been missing for 31 days. This immediately raised serious concerns for investigators. In most missing child cases, the first 24 to 48 hours are critical. But here, more than a month had passed. Police knew that whatever had happened to Caylee, the delay could make finding her extremely difficult. Their first priority was to speak with Caylee Anthony. When Caylee Anthony was questioned by police, she appeared calm. She did not cry. She did not panic. She did not ask where her daughter was. Instead, she repeated the same story she had told her parents. She said, "Caylee was taken by the nanny. The nanny's name was Zenaida Gonzalez. Caylee had been missing for 31 days. Police were stunned. They asked the obvious question, "Why didn't you report your child missing?" Casey's answer did not make sense. She said she had been trying to find Caylee on her own. To investigators, this explanation raised immediate red flags. One of the most bizarre moments in the investigation happened when Caylee told police where she worked. She claimed she had a job at Universal Studios in Orlando. Police asked her to take them there. Caylee agreed. She led detectives through the gates. She walked confidently through hallways. She even waved at employees. Then, suddenly, she stopped. She turned to the detectives and admitted something shocking. She did not work there. She had never worked there. She had lied. This moment was a turning point. Investigators now knew that Caylee was capable of maintaining detailed lies, even when confronted directly. Police began searching for the nanny Caylee described. They investigated apartment complexes, phone records, employment records, friends and acquaintances. They discovered that Zenaida Gonzalez was a real person, but she had never met Caylee Anthony. Zenaida Gonzalez had no connection to Caylee. The nanny story was completely false. This meant that Caylee had lied repeatedly about where her daughter was. And now, police had to consider a much darker possibility. Investigators examined Caylee's car closely. Several people, including Cindy Anthony, said the trunk smelled like decomposition. Police brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted to the trunk. To investigators, this suggested that something connected to death had been in that car. Later, hair believed to belong to Caylee was found inside. Prosecutors would later argue that Caylee's body had been transported in the trunk. The defense would strongly dispute this, but at this stage, police believed the evidence pointed toward a crime. As details of the case became public, the media descended on Orlando. News vans lined the streets. Reporters camped outside the Anthony home. The case was broadcast non-stop. Caylee's face appeared on television screens across the country. The public reaction was intense. People asked, how could a mother wait 31 days? Why did she lie so much? Where was Caylee? Caylee Anthony quickly became one of the most talked about people in America. On July 16, 2008, just one day after Caylee was reported missing, Caylee Anthony was arrested. She was charged with child neglect, making false statements to law enforcement. At this point, Caylee had still not been found. Police hoped that pressure from the arrest might lead to answers. But Caylee continued to lie, and Caylee remained missing. By mid-July 2008, investigators believed Caylee Anthony was no longer alive. The lies were too many, the evidence was too troubling, and time was running out. But the most heartbreaking moment was still to come. In the next chapter, we will cover the search efforts, the discovery of Caylee's remains, and the forensic evidence that would shape the murder case against Caylee Anthony. After Caylee Anthony's arrest, the search for Caylee intensified. Law enforcement officers, volunteers, and search teams combed through neighborhoods, wooded areas, lakes and ponds, roadsides. Search crews focused heavily on areas near the Anthony family home. Despite weeks of searching, no sign of Caylee was found. Each day that passed made the situation more grim. Investigators quietly began to believe what no one wanted to accept. On December 11, 2008, nearly 6 months after Caylee disappeared, a utility worker made a disturbing discovery. While checking meters in a wooded area near the Anthony home, he noticed a bag partially hidden by debris. Inside the area, he saw what appeared to be human remains. Police were called immediately. The location was less than a mile from the Anthony residence. This discovery would change the case forever. Investigators secured the wooded area. What they found was heartbreaking. The remains belonged to a small child. Nearby, officers found a skull, bones, pieces of duct tape, a laundry bag, a blanket. The condition of the remains showed that Caylee had been exposed to the elements for months. Animals, weather, and time had all taken their toll. But one detail immediately stood out. 3 pieces of duct tape were found near the skull. Prosecutors would later argue that the tape had been placed over Caylee's mouth and nose. To them, this suggested intentional suffocation. The defense argued something very different. They claimed the tape was not used to kill Caylee and may have been placed there after death or moved by nature. This single piece of evidence would become one of the most debated elements of the entire trial. Dental records and DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Caylee Marie Anthony. She was just 2 years old. For Caylee's family, the discovery was devastating. Any hope of finding her alive was gone. Now the case shifted from a missing child investigation to a homicide case. The medical examiner performed an autopsy on Caylee's remains. Because of the advanced state of decomposition, determining an exact cause of death was extremely difficult. The official ruling was, cause of death undetermined. This created major challenges for prosecutors. There was no clear evidence of trauma, poisoning, a specific method of killing. However, prosecutors argued that the circumstantial evidence pointed to murder. The defense argued that without a clear cause of death, murder could not be proven. The discovery of Caylee's remains confirmed investigators' worst fears. Now, police focused entirely on building a case against Caylee Anthony. They reviewed Caylee's lies, her behavior after Caylee disappeared, the car evidence, the duct tape, computer searches found later. Each piece alone was not enough, but prosecutors believed together they told a clear story, a story they believed would lead to a murder conviction. The public reaction was overwhelming. People across the country mourned Caylee. Vigils were held. Memorials appeared. Strangers left toys and flowers outside the Anthony home. Anger also grew. Many people believed justice had already been delayed far too long. The pressure on prosecutors was enormous. They now had to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, what happened to Caylee Anthony. Caylee Anthony was gone, but the questions surrounding her death were just beginning. In the next chapter, we will examine the charges filed against Caylee Anthony, the legal strategies on both sides, and how prosecutors prepared for what would become one of the most watched trials in American history. After Caylee Anthony's remains were identified in December 2008, the case officially became a homicide investigation. For months, investigators had suspected this outcome. Now they had confirmation. But one major problem remained. There was no clear cause of death. Without that, prosecutors faced a difficult challenge. They had to prove how Caylee died and who was responsible, using mostly circumstantial evidence. Despite this challenge, authorities believed the evidence pointed in one direction, toward Caylee Anthony. In October 2008, before Caylee's remains were even found, a grand jury indicted Caylee Anthony. She was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, providing false information to law enforcement. These were the most serious charges possible. If convicted of first-degree murder, Caylee Anthony could face the death penalty. The stakes could not have been higher. Prosecutors developed a theory they believed explained Caylee's death. According to the state, Caylee wanted freedom from motherhood. Caylee was seen as an obstacle. Caylee was intentionally killed. Prosecutors argued that Caylee was suffocated, possibly using duct tape. They also focused on computer searches found on the Anthony family computer, including searches related to chloroform. To the prosecution, these searches showed planning. They believed Caylee used chloroform to render Caylee unconscious before killing her. This theory would later be debated heavily in court. Caylee Anthony's defense team was led by Jose Baez, a criminal defense attorney. From the start, Baez made it clear the defense would not admit guilt. Instead, they would attack the prosecution's evidence. They would argue there was no proof of murder. There was no proof of intent. There was no proof of cause of death. Most importantly, they would offer an alternative explanation. The defense claimed that Caylee's death was accidental. According to their theory, Caylee drowned in the family swimming pool. The death was not intentional. Panic followed. They argued that Caylee's father, George Anthony, helped cover up the incident. This claim shocked the public and deeply hurt the Anthony family. George Anthony strongly denied the accusation. But the defense argued that panic and fear, not murder, explained Caylee's actions.
Caylee Anthony spent time in jail while awaiting trial. At one point, she was released on bail, then later returned to custody. During this time, protesters gathered outside the jail. Media coverage intensified. Caylee became one of the most hated figures in America. Public opinion was clear. Most people believed she was guilty. But in a courtroom, public opinion does not decide guilt. Evidence does. Both sides spent months preparing. The prosecution focused on Caylee's lies, the trunk of the car, the duct tape, the timeline. The defense focused on lack of direct evidence, contamination concerns, alternative explanations, reasonable doubt. Experts were hired. Evidence was re-examined. Every detail would be challenged. By the time the trial approached, the case had become a national obsession. Television networks prepared live coverage. Legal experts debated every possibility. Millions of Americans believed justice for Caylee was finally coming. Others worried the case was too weak. Everyone agreed on one thing: this trial would be historic. With the charges set and both sides ready, the courtroom doors were about to open. 12 jurors would soon decide a case that had divided the nation. In the next chapter, we will walk through jury selection, opening statements, and the first explosive moments of the trial. The trial of Caylee Anthony officially began in May 2011. Nearly 3 years after Caylee disappeared. Because of massive media coverage, finding an unbiased jury was extremely difficult. Thousands of people had already formed opinions. To reduce outside influence, the trial was moved from Orange County to Pinellas County, Florida. Potential jurors were questioned carefully. They were asked, had they followed the case? Had they already decided guilt or innocence? Could they judge only the evidence presented in court? After days of questioning, 12 jurors and alternates were selected. Their responsibility was enormous. They would decide whether Caylee Anthony would spend her life in prison or possibly face the death penalty. The prosecution delivered the first opening statement. They told the jury that this case was about a mother who wanted to be free. According to the prosecution, Caylee wanted a life without responsibility. Caylee was in the way. Caylee chose to kill her. Prosecutors described Caylee as a burden to Caylee. They said Caylee used lies, manipulation, and planning to hide the truth. The prosecution emphasized three main ideas: Caylee's constant lying, the duct tape found with Caylee's remains, the evidence from the car trunk. They promised the jury that all the evidence would point to one conclusion: murder. Then the defense stood up. Attorney Jose Baez shocked the courtroom. Instead of denying Caylee was dead, he admitted it immediately. Then he made an explosive claim. He said Caylee drowned accidentally in the family pool. He accused George Anthony, Caylee's father, of helping cover it up. This accusation stunned the courtroom and the public. The defense argued, Caylee did not kill Caylee. There was no murder. This was a tragic accident followed by panic. They told jurors they would hear no proof of how Caylee died. And without proof, they said, there could be no murder conviction. The trial quickly moved into witness testimony. Family members were called first. Cindy Anthony testified about Caylee's lies, the nanny story, the smell in the car. George Anthony testified about the family dynamic, the search for Caylee, his shock at the defense's accusations. Their testimony was emotional and painful. They described a family torn apart by tragedy and public scrutiny. One of the prosecution's strongest arguments involved computer searches. Investigators found searches on the family computer for chloroform, how to make chloroform, neck breaking, foolproof suffocation. Prosecutors argued these searches showed planning. They claimed Caylee researched ways to kill Caylee. The defense challenged this strongly. They argued multiple people used the computer. The timing of the searches was unclear. Some searches were misinterpreted. This evidence became highly disputed and confusing for jurors. The prosecution presented evidence about the trunk of Caylee's car. They described the smell of decomposition, cadaver dogs alerting, hair believed to belong to Caylee. Prosecutors claimed Caylee's body had been stored in the trunk. The defense countered, the smell could have come from garbage. The dogs were unreliable. The forensic evidence was not conclusive. Once again, jurors were left to decide which explanation made sense.
The duct tape found near Caylee's skull became a central issue. The prosecution said it was placed there to suffocate Caylee. The defense said there was no proof the tape was used during life. The tape may have been moved by animals. Nature could explain its location. Experts disagreed. Jurors heard conflicting testimony from forensic specialists. There was no clear answer. One major decision shaped the trial. Caylee Anthony did not testify. She used her legal right to remain silent. The prosecution could not force her to take the stand. Jurors were instructed not to view this as guilt, but many viewers watching at home struggled with that idea. As the trial continued, one truth became clear. This case was not simple. There was no confession, no eyewitness, no clear cause of death, only fragments of evidence. In the next chapter, we will cover closing arguments, jury deliberations,
and the verdict that stunned the nation. After weeks of testimony, both sides prepared to deliver their final arguments. The prosecution went first. They reminded jurors of the evidence they believed proved murder. They spoke about Casey's constant lies, the 31 days Caylee was missing, the duct tape, the trunk of the car. Prosecutors told the jury that while no one witnessed Caylee's death, the circumstantial evidence formed a clear picture. They argued that Caylee Anthony intentionally killed her daughter and then worked hard to hide the truth. They urged jurors to speak for Caylee because Caylee could not speak for herself. The defense then addressed the jury. They focused on one word: doubt. They reminded jurors that the state had not proven how Caylee died, when Caylee died, where Caylee died. They emphasized that there was no clear cause of death. The defense argued that the prosecution's case relied on assumptions, not facts. They told jurors that emotional reactions could not replace evidence. According to the defense, if even one juror had doubt, the law required a not guilty verdict. The jury was sent to deliberate. They were instructed to review the evidence carefully and follow the law. For days, the nation waited. News outlets provided constant updates. People speculated endlessly. Many believed the jury would return a guilty verdict. Others worried the case was too weak. Behind closed doors, jurors examined testimony, physical evidence, legal instructions. They were reminded that their decision had to be unanimous. On July 5, 2011, the jury returned with its verdict. The courtroom was silent. The foreperson stood. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child. She was found guilty only of lying to law enforcement. Gasps filled the courtroom. Across the country, millions watched in disbelief. The reaction was immediate and intense. Many people were furious. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. Social media exploded with anger and confusion. People asked, how could this happen? How could a mother walk free? Was justice served? Others argued that the jury followed the law correctly. They said the prosecution failed to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The divide was deep and emotional. Although acquitted of murder, Caylee Anthony was still sentenced for lying to police. She received a short sentence, but because she had already spent years in jail awaiting trial, she was released shortly after the verdict. On July 17, 2011, Caylee Anthony walked out of jail a free woman. Caylee Anthony, however, would never walk again. The Anthony family was devastated. Caylee's grandparents said they loved their granddaughter and would always mourn her. George Anthony later spoke openly about his pain and mental health struggles following the trial. The verdict did not bring closure. Instead, it left lasting wounds. The trial was over. The jury had spoken. But for many people, the case was far from finished. Questions remained, doubts remained, and the name Caylee Anthony would never be forgotten. In the final chapter, we will examine the long-term impact of the case, changes to the law, and how Caylee's story continues to shape true crime discussions today. The death of Caylee Anthony was more than a criminal case. It became a cultural moment. For the first time, millions of people followed a trial live on television, social media, and online forums, every single day. People debated evidence, people chose sides, people felt personally involved. The case showed how powerful media coverage could be and how dangerous public opinion could become. Some believed the media helped keep attention on Caylee. Others believed it poisoned the jury pool and made a fair trial nearly impossible. Either way, true crime would never be the same. The Caylee Anthony trial is often described as one of the first major examples of trial by media. Courtroom moments were replayed endlessly. Experts argued on television. Speculation filled the gaps where facts were unclear. Many people made up their minds long before the verdict. This raised important questions. Can justice survive non-stop media coverage? Can jurors truly ignore public opinion? Does exposure help or hurt victims? The Caylee Anthony case forced the legal system to confront these issues. One lasting result of Caylee's death was a proposed change in the law. In several states, lawmakers introduced something called Caylee's Law. The idea was simple. If a parent or guardian fails to report a missing child within a certain amount of time, they could face criminal charges. Supporters believed this could save lives. Critics argued the law was too broad and could punish innocent parents in complex situations. While not passed everywhere, Caylee's Law showed that her case had a real impact beyond the courtroom. After her release in 2011, Caylee Anthony largely disappeared from public view. She lived quietly, changed locations, and avoided the spotlight. Over the years, she gave few interviews and made rare public appearances. Public opinion toward her remains deeply negative. Many people still believe she knows more than she has ever said. Legally, however, she was acquitted, and under the law, she cannot be tried again for Caylee's death. Caylee's grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony, continued to live with grief and public judgment. George Anthony spoke openly about depression and emotional pain following the trial. The family attempted to rebuild their lives while carrying a loss that never fades. They have consistently said they loved Caylee deeply. For them, the trial did not bring closure, only silence. More than a decade later, people still talk about Caylee Anthony. Podcasts revisit the case. Documentaries reanalyze the evidence. Online discussions continue. Why? Because the case sits at the uncomfortable intersection of law, emotion, media, human behavior. It reminds us that legal truth is not always emotional truth. Not guilty does not always mean innocent. Justice does not always feel satisfying. Caylee Anthony was 2 years old. She never had a chance to grow up, never had a voice, never had a future. What happened to her may never be fully known, but her name remains. Her story reminds us why justice must be careful, why evidence matters, and why every child deserves protection. This case did not end with a clear answer. It ended with questions, and those questions are why we still remember Caylee Anthony today. Cases like this stay with us because the questions never go away. If this documentary made you think, leave your perspective in the comments. And if you want more deep, respectful true crime stories, subscribe to The Darken Realm.